What if the man we think of as America's greatest humorist, the creator of Huckleberry Finn, was also one of the nation's first master brand builders, crafting a public persona as carefully as any modern celebrity? Introduction. In Mark Twain by Pulitzer Prize, winning biographer Ron Chernow, we step beyond the white suit and the witty one-liners to uncover the complex, often contradictory life of Samuel Clemens, the man behind the myth. This sweeping, meticulously researched biography reveals Twain not just as a literary genius, but as a shrewd self-promoter, a risk-taking entrepreneur, a biting social critic, and a man plagued by personal tragedy and inner turmoil. It's a definitive portrait of an American icon whose influence still shapes how we tell stories and sell ourselves today. Chapter 1. Persona and Celebrity. Mark Twain wasn't just born a celebrity. He built himself into one. In this chapter, Chernow shows us how Samuel Clemens, a small-town boy from Missouri, transformed into Mark Twain, one of the most recognizable names in the world. And here's the twist. It wasn't an accident. Twain understood the power of image long before Instagram or YouTube existed. He crafted a public persona, a charming, witty, slightly rebellious storyteller that audiences couldn't get enough of. Think of it like an early version of a personal brand. Just as today's influencers carefully pick their outfits, captions, and online personas, Twain fine-tuned his look, his speech, and even his mannerisms to fit the role people expected. But this wasn't only about vanity. Twain knew that being memorable sold books, filled lecture halls, and made him stand out in a crowded market of authors. His famous white suit wasn't just clothing, it was a walking billboard. He leaned into humor and controversy, making sure people were always talking about him, whether they agreed with him or not. Chernow also points out that this public Twain didn't always match the private Samuel Clemens. Behind the scenes, he wrestled with insecurities, financial troubles, and self-doubt. Yet, he kept the performance going because he understood something timeless. In the business of storytelling, you're not just selling the story, you're selling yourself. It's a reminder that even in the 1800s, the art of self-promotion was alive and well, and Mark Twain was one of its earliest masters. Chapter 2. Complex Identity and Contradictions. Mark Twain was full of contradictions, and that's exactly what makes him so fascinating. In this chapter, Chernow paints a picture of a man who could be generous and empathetic one moment, then self-centered and stubborn the next. It's like knowing someone who can make you laugh until your stomach hurts, but also leave you shaking your head in frustration. On one hand, Twain was a brilliant humorist and social commentator who could see the flaws in society and call them out with razor-sharp wit. On the other hand, he sometimes held views or made choices that didn't line up with his own moral compass. For example, while he wrote powerfully about the evils of slavery, he often stayed quiet on other pressing issues of racial violence in his time. Chernow shows how Twain's identity shifted depending on the audience and stage of life he was in. He could be the bold truth-teller at one event, and then the cautious people-pleaser at another. In modern terms, it's like someone who posts fiery opinions on social media, but keeps things light and friendly in the office group chat. This push and pull between ideals and actions was a constant theme in Twain's life. He wanted to be principled, but he also wanted to be liked, successful, and financially secure. And that's the heart of his complexity. He wasn't a simple hero or villain, but a deeply human mix of strengths and flaws. It's a reminder that even icons we admire are still works in progress, full of contradictions just like the rest of us. Chapter 3. Political and Moral Convictions. Mark Twain wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers when it came to politics and morality, at least not later in life. In this chapter, Chernow shows how Twain evolved from a man mostly focused on his own success to someone willing to speak out against big injustices, even if it cost him fans. One of the strongest examples was his stance on imperialism. When the U.S. began expanding its reach overseas, Twain didn't cheer like many others did. Instead, he criticized it, saying America was betraying its own ideals by oppressing other nations. Imagine a famous comedian today openly challenging government policies on live TV. It's risky, but makes a point. Twain also had strong feelings about human rights and fairness. He spoke out against racism, the mistreatment of Chinese immigrants, and the hypocrisy he saw in organized religion. Still, his convictions weren't flawless. There were times when he stayed silent on urgent issues, like the wave of lynchings in America, perhaps fearing backlash or wanting to protect his public image. Chernow makes it clear that Twain's moral compass was complicated. He could be incredibly progressive for his era, yet cautious when the stakes threatened his reputation or finances. In that way, he was a lot like many of us, wanting to stand up for what's right, but also worried about the consequences. Ultimately, this chapter shows Twain as a man who grew braver with age, using his voice to challenge the powerful and question the status quo, even if he couldn't live up to all his ideals all the time. Chapter 4: Financial Misadventures. Mark Twain may have been a literary genius, but when it came to money, he had a knack for making the wrong bets. In this chapter, Chernow dives into Twain's risky business decisions and how they nearly ruined him. More than once, one of his biggest blunders was sinking a fortune into the page typesetter, a fancy machine meant to revolutionize printing. Twain was convinced it would make him rich, but the technology kept breaking down and was quickly outpaced by cheaper, simpler alternatives. It's a bit like investing your life savings into the next big smartphone, only to find out a competitor launches something better a month later. Twain also tried his hand at publishing, but his ventures there were equally shaky. He often invested in projects based on personal connections or gut feelings rather than sound business advice. His loyalty and optimism, great traits for a friend, were terrible for his bank account. The result? Mountains of debt. At one point, Twain had to go on an exhausting world lecture tour just to pay off his creditors. Imagine having to take every possible gig, not because you want to, but because your bills demand it. Chernow uses these stories to show that Twain's financial troubles weren't just bad luck. They were tied to his personality. He loved grand ideas, hated saying no, and believed he could outwit any setback. In the end, his money mistakes became as much a part of his legacy as his novels, proving that even geniuses aren't immune to a bad investment. Chapter 5: Personal Tragedy and Grief. Behind Mark Twain's sharp wit and larger-than-life persona was a man who knew deep, devastating loss. In this chapter, Chernow explores the string of personal tragedies that left lasting marks on Twain's heart and shaped the tone of his later work. Twain faced the unimaginable, losing several of his closest family members. The death of his beloved wife, Olivia, was a crushing blow. She had been his emotional anchor, his editor, and his steadying influence. Without her, Twain often felt unmoored. Even worse, he endured the deaths of 3 of his 4 children, each loss carving another wound that never fully healed. These weren't just private sorrows. They spilled into his public life. His humor, once light and playful, grew sharper and more biting. He became more cynical in his speeches and writing, as if the weight of grief stripped away some of the hopefulness he once carried. It's similar to how someone who has gone through a major loss might start seeing the world with a bit more skepticism, even if they still crack jokes. Chernow also notes that Twain dealt with grief in ways that weren't always healthy, burying himself in work, traveling constantly, or throwing himself into causes and projects to distract from the pain. But no matter how busy he stayed, the emptiness lingered. This chapter shows that Twain's brilliance didn't protect him from heartbreak. If anything, it made his losses hit harder because he felt them and expressed them so vividly. His story is a reminder that even icons we admire are human, carrying private battles the public rarely sees. Chapter 6: Literary Mastery and Legacy. Mark Twain didn't just write books. He helped shape American literature. In this chapter, Chernow shows how Twain's storytelling style, sharp social commentary, and unforgettable characters made him one of the most influential writers in history. His masterpiece, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, is at the heart of this legacy. It wasn't just a fun river adventure. It tackled big themes like freedom, morality, and race in ways that were bold for the time. Twain's use of everyday speech and regional dialects broke literary rules, making his characters feel real instead of polished and distant. It's like watching a movie where the dialogue sounds exactly how people talk in real life. You instantly connect with it. Twain's other works, from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer to his travel writings, showed his range. He could make you laugh, make you think, and sometimes make you uncomfortable, all in the same chapter. His humor wasn't just for laughs. It was a tool to poke at hypocrisy, challenge authority, and make readers reflect on themselves. Chernow also makes it clear that Twain's influence didn't end when he died. Writers from Ernest Hemingway to modern-day novelists credit him for shaping their craft. His books are still read, studied, and adapted because they tap into universal human truths. In short, Twain's legacy isn't just about entertaining stories. It's about changing how stories are told. He proved that literature could be both smart and accessible, both deeply meaningful and wildly entertaining, a balance few have mastered as well as he did. Chapter 7: Public Wit versus Private Turmoil. Mark Twain could light up a room with his humor, but behind that dazzling wit was a man wrestling with his own storms. In this chapter, Chernow peels back the curtain to reveal the contrast between Twain's public image and his private struggles. On stage and in print, Twain was the ultimate entertainer, quick with a joke, clever with a comeback, and fearless in poking fun at the powerful. People saw him as confident, even larger than life. But in private, he often battled self-doubt, financial stress, and bouts of depression. It's a bit like the friend who's the life of every party but admits, in quiet moments, that they're exhausted inside. Twain's humor sometimes acted as armor. By making people laugh, he could hide his frustrations, disappointments, and insecurities. But the act was hard to maintain, especially during periods when his debts piled up or family tragedies weighed heavily on him. Chernow shows how the more Twain felt pressure in his personal life, the more he doubled down on keeping his public persona intact. This split took a toll. Keeping up the cheerful, witty image while battling inner turmoil drained him emotionally. Yet, paradoxically, those struggles often fueled his best writing, giving it depth and bite. The chapter is a reminder that what we see on the outside rarely tells the full story. Twain's ability to make the world laugh didn't mean he lived without pain. It just meant he knew how to turn that pain into something the world would applaud. Chapter 8: Silences and Blind Spots. Even a sharp observer like Mark Twain had areas where he stayed quiet, or simply didn't see the full picture. In this chapter, Chernow explores the moments when Twain's moral courage seemed to falter, revealing the limits of even the boldest voices. Twain is rightly celebrated for condemning slavery in works like Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but he didn't always speak up about the racial violence and injustice happening in his own time, like the wave of lynchings across America. It's a bit like someone today who posts passionately about one cause but stays silent on another equally urgent issue. sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of blind spots. Some of these silences may have been strategic. Twain was deeply aware of his public image and the need to keep audiences on his side, especially when his finances depended on book sales and lecture tours. Other times, he may simply have lacked the first-hand perspective to grasp the depth of certain injustices. Chernow also notes that Twain's blind spots weren't limited to race. In some social issues, he seemed ahead of his time, while in others, he reflected the prejudices and limitations of the era he lived in. This chapter doesn't tear down Twain's legacy, it humanizes it. It reminds us that even cultural giants can miss the mark, and that moral leadership is not about being perfect, but about continually expanding our awareness and willingness to speak up. Twain's silences are part of his story, just as much as his words. Chapter 9. Eccentric Angelfish Obsession. Late in life, Mark Twain developed what Chernow calls his angelfish obsession, a peculiar and often misunderstood chapter in his personal story. The angelfish were a group of young girls, mostly teenagers, whom Twain befriended, mentored, and corresponded with. He gave them the nickname because he saw them as pure, lively, and full of energy, like flashes of light in his otherwise lonely final years. Twain's letters to these girls were playful, affectionate, and full of advice, and he even formed an informal angelfish club. For him, they were a source of joy, creativity, and emotional renewal. Chernow emphasizes that there's no clear evidence of anything improper, but the relationships did raise eyebrows, even among some of his friends at the time. In many ways, the angelfish reflected Twain's longing for innocence and vitality after so much loss in his life. With his wife and several children gone, he sought connection in a way that made him feel like a mentor, storyteller, and doting uncle figure. It's a little like a retired teacher keeping in touch with former students. Not unusual in spirit, but unusual in the scale and intensity Twain gave it. Chernow doesn't shy away from the discomfort modern readers might feel about this phase, but he also frames it within Twain's deep loneliness and need for emotional companionship. The Angelfish chapter is a reminder that even great figures can have quirks that don't fit neatly into our ideas of them, adding yet another layer to Twain's complex, sometimes puzzling humanity. Chapter 10. Depth of Scholarship. Ron Chernow's Mark Twain isn't just a biography. It's a deep dive into the man's entire world. In this chapter, Chernow's sheer depth of research takes center stage, showing how years of sifting through letters, journals, financial records, and eyewitness accounts allowed him to paint such a vivid, layered portrait of Twain. This isn't a quick, surface-level retelling. Chernow connects Twain's personal experiences to the social, political, and cultural forces of his time, making it clear how the world shaped him, and how he, in turn, shaped the world. It's like watching a behind-the-scenes documentary where you suddenly understand why certain moments in a movie hit so hard. Chernow also doesn't cherry-pick the flattering parts. He includes Twain's triumphs, his blunders, his charm, and his flaws, creating a fully human picture. That balance is part of what makes the book so compelling. You're not just reading about a legend. You're getting to know a complicated person in all his contradictions. The detail is staggering. Every major phase of Twain's life, his childhood in Missouri, his riverboat days, his fame, his financial disasters, his personal tragedies, is woven together with context that helps the reader see not just what happened, but why it mattered. By the end, it's clear this biography will likely stand as the definitive account of Twain's life for years to come. Chernow's depth of scholarship turns history into something alive, making Twain feel as real as someone you could sit down and talk to over coffee, if only he were still around. Conclusion. Mark Twain's life, as Ron Chernow tells it, is so much more than the image of a witty man in a white suit. It's a story of ambition, creativity, heartbreak, contradictions, and reinvention. We see a genius who shaped American literature, a showman who mastered self-promotion before it was even a thing, and a human being who faced crushing loss, financial disaster, and moral dilemmas. What makes Chernow's biography so powerful is how it blends the public legend with a private man. You get the humor, yes, but also the insecurities, the questionable choices, the moments of bravery, and the times he fell short. It's like meeting a hero and realizing they're even more interesting and more human than you imagined. Reading this book isn't just learning about Mark Twain. It's learning about ambition, resilience, and the complexity of human nature. Whether you're a fan of his novels, curious about the history of celebrity, or just love a well-told life story, this biography delivers. If you've enjoyed this summary, I highly recommend diving into the full book. Chernow's storytelling will keep you hooked from the first page to the last. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more in-depth audiobook summaries. Share your thoughts in the comments. What surprised you most about Twain's life? I'd love to hear your take, because as Twain himself might say, the truth is stranger than fiction, and his life proves it.